today how to make a banana cream cheese roll cake. The recipe is from King Arthur Flour, so I'll be sure to give you the link for that. The recipe itself is broken up into 3 separate parts: the cake batter, the syrup, and the cream cheese filling. So right now I've only gotten the mise en place for my cake batter because that's all I need right now. When the cake comes out of the oven, it needs to cool for about 30 minutes, and during that time I can make the filling. I've already preheated my oven to 375 degrees, and I got my pan all set. This is a jelly roll pan, and typically they're about 10.5 inches by 15.5 inches, although they can vary slightly in size, and they have a rim on them. To prepare it, I've cut a piece of parchment exactly the size of the bottom, and then I've sprayed it with some cooking spray to make sure that my cake does not stick. It's important to really make sure that you are following the directions for your mise en place. The first thing you need is 2 large eggs, and you need to separate them. Eggs separate a lot better when they're cold. However, we want the ingredients for our cake batter to be closer to room temperature. So I recommend that you separate them right away and then set them aside while you get the rest of your items ready. Next, you need 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar, also divided. So you need a 1/2 cup and a 1/4 cup. Again, it's really important to make sure that you don't add all of the sugar in at the wrong step. The next thing I got was 1 cup of flour. Now, if you look at my cup, you can see it's not level with the top. However, I weighed this at 120 grams, so I know it's accurate. When I was putting the flour into the cup, I dipped it into my container so it got compacted. I also have 1/2 teaspoon of salt for flavor, and then 1/2 teaspoon of both baking powder and baking soda. Typically, when they're used together in a recipe, baking powder is doing most of the heavy lifting when it comes to the leavening, and baking soda is there to help balance out some of the acidity, and it gives a little bit more of a tender crumb. And my final ingredient is 1 ripe banana that I've mashed. Now it's time to whip up our egg whites. I'm going to use the whip attachment on my KitchenAid mixer. You certainly could do this by hand, but it will take you a little bit longer. When you place your egg whites into the bowl, you're going to whip them until they get to soft peaks. That means that when I pull this out, it's going to flop back over. It's really important that you don't add your sugar until you get to this stage. And when you're adding your sugar, you want to do it gradually. Otherwise, if you add your sugar too early, your eggs won't foam up the way that you want them to. Another tip is that your egg whites won't whip up properly if there's any fat in the bowl or on your whip attachment. So really make sure that they are clean. You can see that my egg whites have reached the soft peak stage. When I pulled the beater out, it lifted up and then folded back over on itself. Now it's time to start gradually adding the granulated sugar. My eggs have now reached the stiff peak stage. It's important that you don't overbeat them or they will end up deflating. You want stiff but not dry peaks. Transfer your whipped egg whites into a clean bowl and set aside for later. I've now placed my egg yolks into my stand mixer bowl, and I'm going to whip them until thick and pale yellow, about 5 minutes on high speed. And then I'm going to gradually beat in the remaining 1/2 cup of sugar. I'm done whipping up my egg yolks, and now it's time to look at the dry ingredients. So into a bowl, add your flour, your chemical leaveners, and your salt, and use a fork or a small whisk to make sure that it's all evenly dispersed. Now I'm going to very carefully and lightly mix in my bananas into my egg yolks. We worked really hard to develop a lot of air cells in both of our eggs, and we don't want to destroy that by mixing things in too hard. Once you have gently stirred in your bananas, now you're going to add your flour mixture, and the same thing, very gently fold it in. When mixing, one of our goals is to have uniformity throughout the batter. So while you're mixing slowly, do make sure that everything gets mixed in. And now it's time to very carefully fold in our whipped egg whites. It is time to pan our cake, and we want to be really careful to make sure that we have an even thickness going throughout this. We're going to place it in the oven for about 8 to 12 minutes. We want to make sure that we are watching for doneness. If you find that when you are trying to spread this out, the parchment paper keeps sliding around, I have seen a little tip where you put some of the batter underneath the corners of the parchment paper, and that way it'll make sure it's not moving for you. To make the sugar syrup, I've combined 1 cup of brown sugar along with ½ cup of water in a medium saucepan. I'm going to cook it over medium heat until the sugar dissolves and it becomes syrupy. At that point, I'm going to take it off the heat and stir in 2 tablespoons of butter. The recipe does call for 2 to 4 tablespoons of rum. That is optional. You could also add in a 1/4 teaspoon of rum flavoring and it'll taste great. My sugar syrup is done and I'm going to set it aside to cool for a little bit. I'm also ready to prepare the things for my cream cheese frosting. And what you need is 1 8-ounce block of cream cheese, room temperature, and 1 cup of confectioner's sugar. I recommend that you sift the confectioner's sugar so that you don't have lumps in your frosting. You're going to beat those 2 things together until smooth and then add in a pinch of salt and a 1/4 cup of your brown sugar syrup into the frosting. I just pulled my cake out of the oven. It started to pull away from the pan. I'm going to go around this cake and loosen up the edges. So that's another good reason to spray the sides of your pan. I'm going to turn the cake over and peel off the parchment paper. And you can see because I sprayed it, it comes off evenly. Be careful around the edges because that's where it may want to pull and rip. Now you can do this a couple different ways. You can find a nice, clean, thin kitchen towel, dust it lightly with flour, place it on top and roll it up like that was the filling. Or you can use a piece of parchment paper. I'm going to lightly dust the top of my cake with confectioner's sugar. It will help make sure that either my towel or my parchment paper does not stick. And then placing my parchment paper on top, I'm going to roll it up very carefully. You can see that it actually did start to stick to my counter a little bit. To finish my cake, I'm going to unroll it, brush it with some of the sugar syrup, and then put on the cream cheese frosting. We're going to use about 2 to 3 tablespoons of this syrup. The rest you can keep to put over ice cream or pancakes. You're not looking to majorly soak it. You just want to give a little bit more flavor and to make sure that it stays pliable and moist. Make sure that you spread it evenly from edge to edge. the end where you're going to be rolling it up, because most likely some of this is going to start to squish out there. Okay, and whatever direction you had rolled it the first time, that's the direction that you want to roll it now. Okay, and you want to let it sit seam side down. Place it into the refrigerator for 20 to 30 minutes, and at that point, if you'd like, you can throw it in the freezer for up to 3 months, or take it out, slice, and enjoy. And my last ingredient is, Tracy, seriously, you are ridiculous.